She had one of the most unforgettable voices of her generation, and yet, it all ended in silence. At her peak, she was everywhere. On the radio, on television, on magazine covers. Her name, impossible to ignore. Awards followed her. Crowds followed her. The world followed her. But behind all of that, behind the music, behind the image, something was already beginning to fall apart. And not slowly, not quietly, but in a way that no one around her seemed able to stop. So what really happened to Amy Winehouse? Because this wasn't just another rise to fame. This wasn't just another story about success and pressure and celebrity. This was something different, something deeper. She didn't sound like anyone else. Not polished, not manufactured. Her voice felt lived in, like every word had already been experienced before it was ever recorded. There was pain in it. There was honesty in it. And there was something else, something harder to explain. A kind of emotional weight that people didn't just hear, they felt, and that's why they listened. That's why they stayed. Because her music didn't feel like performance. It felt like truth. But that kind of truth comes at a cost, because Amy didn't just write about pain. She stayed inside it. She carried it everywhere. And as her music reached more people, as her voice traveled further, as her success grew, her life became harder to hold together. Fame didn't protect her. It exposed her. Every mistake, every relapse, every moment of weakness became visible, public, permanent. There was no space to fall apart quietly. And then there was love. Not simple, not stable, but intense in a way that felt impossible to escape. A connection that looked like everything, but slowly became something else. Something heavier. Something that pulled her deeper into everything she was already struggling with. From the outside, it looked like success, but inside, it was pressure, confusion, and a growing sense that she was losing control. This isn't just a story about talent. It's about what happens when someone gives everything to their art, when their identity becomes inseparable from their pain, and when the world keeps asking for more, even when there's nothing left to give. Because in the end, Amy Winehouse didn't just lose control of her life. She lost the ability to stop falling. And to understand how it all led there, we have to go back to the very beginning. London, Camden Town. Not the kind of place people imagine when they think about global fame. The streets were busy, sometimes chaotic. Tight corners, old buildings, a place full of movement, but never quite still. And that's where Amy Winehouse's story began. Inside her home, it was different. Not quieter, but warmer. Music wasn't something special. It wasn't an event. It was just always there. Her father would sing old jazz songs, the kind that carried emotion, the kind that told stories, even without trying. Records played in the background. Frank Sinatra, Ella Fitzgerald, voices from another time, full of feeling, full of depth, full of something that stayed with you. And without anyone realizing it, those sounds were shaping her, There were no formal lessons, no strict training, no pressure to become anything. Just moments, family gatherings, rooms filled with people, voices overlapping, laughter, conversation, life happening all at once. And then someone would say, "Go on," and a young Amy would step forward, not nervous, not hesitant, just ready. Sometimes they would stand her on a table, introduce her like she was already a performer, and she would bow, just slightly, before she began. Then she would sing, not like a child copying what she heard, but like someone who understood it. That was the difference. Even at that age, there was something deeper, something instinctive. She didn't perform. She expressed. Outside of that world, things didn't always feel the same. At school, she didn't quite fit. Not because she tried to be different, but because she didn't know how to be anything else. While other kids followed trends, Amy followed feeling. She wasn't interested in what was popular. She was drawn to what was real. Music that carried emotion, that had weight, that meant something. By the time she reached her early teens, that connection had already become something more, something serious. At 14, she picked up a guitar, not perfectly, not professionally, but enough to begin turning thoughts into songs. And that's when something shifted, because writing music gave her something she didn't have anywhere else, a way to understand herself, a way to release what she couldn't say out loud. Her lyrics weren't careful. They weren't designed to impress. They weren't shaped to fit expectations. They were direct, personal, sometimes uncomfortable, but always honest. And that honesty was powerful, because most people hide what they feel. They filter it. They soften it. They protect themselves from it. But Amy didn't. She felt everything, fully. The joy, the confusion, the insecurity, the pain. Nothing was held back. And when someone experiences the world like that, everything hits harder. Every moment feels bigger. Every emotion lasts longer. Even then, there were signs, not obvious ones, nothing dramatic, just small things, easy to miss. A sensitivity, an intensity, a way of reacting to the world that didn't come with limits. And as her talent grew, so did that intensity. Because for Amy, music wasn't just something she enjoyed. It wasn't just something she was good at. It was the only place where everything inside her finally made sense. Where the noise became something structured. Where the confusion became something clear. But life outside of music doesn't work the same way. There's no melody, no rhythm, no resolution. And eventually, that difference would start to matter, because the same depth that made her music powerful would also make her life much harder to carry. It didn't take long for people to realize Amy Winehouse wasn't like everyone else. There was something different, not just in her voice, but in the way she used it. She didn't perform songs. She lived inside them. Every word felt like it came from somewhere real, not imagined, not exaggerated, experienced. And in an industry built on image, that kind of honesty stood out immediately. When record labels first started paying attention, it wasn't because she fit a mold. It was because she wasn't trying to be polished. She wasn't trying to be commercial. She wasn't trying to sound like anyone else. And that made her impossible to ignore. When her debut album, Frank, was released, it didn't arrive with massive hype. There was no global campaign, no overwhelming expectations. But something happened, almost quietly at first. People listened, and then they kept listening, because the album felt different, raw, unfiltered, almost unfinished in places. But that was exactly what made it powerful. It wasn't designed to be perfect. It was designed to be honest. Critics noticed it. They didn't just praise her voice. They praised her writing, her phrasing, her ability to turn personal experience into something universal. And audiences felt it, because even if they hadn't lived her life, they understood the emotion, they recognized it. And suddenly, Amy Winehouse wasn't just another new artist. She was something rare, something real. But even then, she wasn't satisfied. That was the contradiction. While the world was celebrating her, she was questioning everything. She felt the album didn't fully represent her, that it wasn't complete, that something was missing. And that kind of mindset can create greatness, but it also creates pressure, because nothing ever feels finished. Nothing ever feels enough. And that pressure doesn't stay in one place. It follows you into the studio, onto the stage, into your relationships. Around that same time, something else entered her life. Something that would change everything. His name was Blake Fielder Civil. He wasn't part of her world. He wasn't part of the industry. But to Amy, he felt familiar, like someone who understood her, without needing an explanation. And for someone who felt everything so deeply, that kind of connection was powerful. Their relationship didn't develop slowly. There was no careful distance, no time to step back and think clearly. It was immediate, intense, all-consuming. They weren't just together, they depended on each other. Emotionally, they fed off each other's energy. The highs felt incredible, like nothing else mattered, like everything made sense, as long as they were together. But the lows were just as intense. Arguments, distance, reconnection, over and over again. It became a cycle, one that neither of them seemed able to break. And somewhere inside that cycle, another element entered the picture: drugs. At first, it didn't look like destruction. It didn't feel like danger. It felt like relief, like something that softened everything, took the edge off, made the highs easier, and the lows less overwhelming. But addiction doesn't stay small. It doesn't stay controlled. It grows quietly, gradually, until it becomes part of everyday life. And by the time you realize it, it's already taken hold. While all of this was happening, Amy's career continued to move forward. More performances, more recognition, more attention. From the outside, everything looked like progress. Her music was evolving. Her voice was becoming stronger. Her identity more defined. But inside, two paths were forming, one leading toward success, recognition, legacy, the other leading somewhere far less stable. Dependency, pressure, emotional instability. And the more personal her music became, the harder it was to separate those two paths, because she wasn't writing stories. She was writing her life. Every argument, every moment of doubt, every feeling she couldn't escape turned into lyrics, and people loved that because it didn't feel like performance. It felt real. But that kind of honesty comes with a cost, because when your art depends on your pain, letting go of that pain isn't always easy. In some ways, it can feel like losing the very thing that makes your work meaningful. And for Amy, that line became blurred. Her relationship with Blake continued to intensify. They couldn't stay apart. And what came next would no longer stay hidden. It would unfold in front of everyone. At some point, the cracks were no longer subtle. They didn't need to be explained. They didn't need to be pointed out. They were visible to everyone. In the photos, in the headlines, in the way she walked, in the way she looked, and in the way she struggled just to stay present. Amy Winehouse was no longer just an artist under pressure. She had become a public unraveling. And once something reaches that point, it becomes very difficult to reverse. Her relationship with Blake never truly ended. Even when they were apart, there was still a connection. Not stable, not healthy, but strong enough to keep pulling her back. And when he went to prison, it didn't create clarity. It created emptiness, a silence that felt heavier than the chaos they had shared. And Amy didn't know how to sit with that silence. So she filled it with alcohol, with drugs, with anything that could dull the feeling, even for a moment. But instead of numbing it, it made everything louder, more chaotic, more unpredictable, more visible. And then came the moment that changed everything. A video surfaced. Amy, smoking crack cocaine. Not rumors anymore. Not speculation. Reality. Clear. Undeniable. And suddenly, the world saw just how far things had gone. There was no distance anymore between Amy the artist and Amy the struggle. They became the same person. In the eyes of the public, her body began to change. Quickly, noticeably, she became thinner, weaker, fragile in a way that couldn't be hidden. Photos captured her, looking exhausted, disconnected, like someone who hadn't rested in a very long time. And then there were the cuts, marks on her arms, visible, difficult to ignore, signs of something deeper, something internal that couldn't be explained. With a headline, for many people watching, this was no longer about fame. It was no longer about music. It became something else. Concern, fear, a sense that what they were seeing was not sustainable. But even then, the situation wasn't simple. Amy did try to change. She entered rehab more than once. And during those periods, there were moments where everything looked different. She appeared healthier, more grounded, more present. There were glimpses of the person she used to be, and each time, people hoped this would be the turning point, that this time, Things would change, but addiction doesn't follow a straight path. It doesn't move forward in a clean, predictable way. It loops, it returns, it waits for moments of weakness and finds its way back in. And each time it does, it becomes harder to push it away. Meanwhile, the world kept watching. The headlines didn't stop. If anything, they intensified. Every outing, every mistake, every moment of instability became content, something to analyze, something to discuss, something to consume. And over time, the tone changed. Less empathy, more judgment, less concern, more fascination. It became less about helping and more about watching to see what would happen next. Amy began to withdraw from friends, from collaborators, from people who genuinely cared about her, because addiction creates distance, not just physically, but emotionally. It isolates. It convinces you that you don't need anyone, even when you need help the most. Her relationship with Mark Ronson, once close, began to fracture. There were misunderstandings, tension, moments where words were said that couldn't be taken back. And behind those moments, there was always the same question. Was it Amy speaking, or the addiction? Because sometimes it's impossible to tell the difference. There were still flashes of brilliance, moments where she sang, and everything felt the same as before. Raw, emotional, powerful, reminding people of who she was and what she could still be. But those moments became less frequent, harder to reach, further apart. In 2009, she stepped away, left the spotlight, traveled to St. Lucia, and for a brief moment, things looked different. She smiled more. She relaxed. She looked like herself again. Not the headlines, not the image, just Amy. And people saw that and believed maybe this was the beginning of something better. But even there, the patterns didn't fully disappear. The drinking continued. The habits remained. And when she returned, they came back with her. Her marriage to Blake ended. A divorce that felt inevitable, but still left something behind. Because despite everything, he was part of her identity. And losing that created another void, one that was just as difficult to fill. The instability continued. Legal issues, public incidents, moments that made it harder to separate the artist from the struggle. Then came 2011, and with it, another attempt to come back. Amy announced she would return to rehab, this time to deal with alcohol. It sounded serious, focused, like something had shifted, like maybe this time would be different. But just days later, she checked herself out and instead prepared for a comeback tour, a chance to prove something to herself, to the public, to everyone who was watching, that she was still in control, still capable, still Amy Winehouse. But reality was something else entirely. In Belgrade, everything fell apart. On stage, in front of thousands of people, Amy couldn't perform. She struggled to stand. Her words were unclear. Her connection, gone. The crowd reacted slowly at first. Confusion, then discomfort, then frustration, and finally, they booed. It was one of the most painful moments of her entire life. Not because it was public, but because it was undeniable. This wasn't a bad performance. This wasn't an off night. This was someone who should not have been on that stage at all. The tour was canceled immediately, and Amy returned home. There were questions, serious ones. Why was she performing? Why wasn't she protected? Why didn't someone stop this before it reached this point? But by then, those questions came too late, because something had already shifted. After Belgrade, everything went quiet. Fewer appearances, less attention, less noise, and for a moment, it felt like the world had stepped back. But sometimes, silence isn't peace. Sometimes, it's what happens when everything holding something together finally disappears, and what's left is fragile, very fragile. After Belgrade, Amy returned home, back to Camden. The same streets, the same buildings, the same place where everything had once begun. But this time, it felt different. There were no crowds waiting outside, no cameras, no noise, just quiet. A kind of quiet that feels heavy, the kind of silence that doesn't bring peace, but forces you to face everything you've been trying to escape. In those final days, something shifted. She reached out, called friends, spoke about music again, talked about plans, about recording, about starting over. There was something there, a small sense of clarity, of intention. Like maybe, after everything, she was beginning to find her way back. And for a moment, it felt possible that this wasn't the end of her story, that everything she had been through, the fame, the pressure, the addiction, might still lead somewhere else, somewhere better, somewhere calmer. But on July 23rd, 2011, that possibility ended. Amy Winehouse was found dead. In her home, she was 27 years old. The cause? Alcohol poisoning. Just like that. The voice that had carried so much emotion, so much honesty, so much truth, was gone. The reaction was immediate. Shock, grief, confusion, and then the questions. Who was responsible? Was it the fame, the pressure, the relationship, the addiction, the media? But the truth was never that simple, because it wasn't just one thing. It was everything, combined. The pressure that never stopped, the love that became dependency, the need to feel everything, and the inability to turn it off. The environment, the timing, the choices, the circumstances, all of it, together. But beyond all of that, something else remained, something that didn't disappear. Her voice, her writing, her honesty. Amy didn't perform emotion, she lived it. Every lyric, every note came from something real. And that's why people connected with her. That's why they still do. Because real doesn't fade. In the end, it wasn't just about fame. It wasn't just about talent. It was about a life that burned too brightly and ended too soon. But what she left behind didn't disappear with her. Her music stayed. Her influence stayed. Her story stayed, and it will continue to be felt for generations to come. If her story stayed with you, tell me what moment you will never forget. And if you believe stories like this matter, then this channel was made for you.